Because this week marks 20 years of continuous human presence on the International Space Station, we're going to have a look back at the history of space stations.
That's right, from Salute to the ISS, via Skylab, Mir, and not forgetting Tiangong. We'll do our best to celebrate them all.
Don't forget to please do get in touch and let us know your thoughts about what we're doing. Use @SpaceandThings1 on Twitter or tag us @SpaceandThings Podcast on Facebook and Instagram.
That would be delightful, and please do send any of your spaceflight loving friends over to us. If you like what we're doing, then they might too. But right now, let us try and entertain you with episode 9 of Space and Things.
Oh my God! Unbelievable, but it is right this time.
You're listening to the Space and Things podcast with Emily Carney and Dave Giles.
I'm Emily Carney.
And I'm Dave Giles, and welcome to episode 9 of our podcast. Hey, Emily, before we get going, I was quite excited earlier because I went on Twitter and I saw that you had been part of the Her Story 100 video, which has gone online today, which was amazing.
Yes, I was really honored to be asked to be a part of that. I want to give a shout out to Christina Corp. I don't know if I missed your name up, Christina. I really apologize, but I was really honored to be asked to be part of that. But yeah, I'm very humbled because for those of you who have watched the video, if you haven't watched it yet, please check it out. It's on our social media. But oh my gosh, yeah, there was some legends in there.
Absolutely.
There were some legends in there.
Yes.
Legendary women. So I was very honored to even be a part of that in any way possible. I was like, wow. So
yeah, that was some guest list to be part of, wasn't it? That's some party I'd like to be at, that's for sure.
Yeah, it was incredible. So I'm really honored and very humbled to be a part of it. And basically, the video discusses the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, which gave women in the United States the right to vote. And that's basically my political statement for this year. I know it's election year in the United States, so get out, use your freedom of choice, use your voice, and get out and vote.
Exactly. Also, Emily, I've really enjoyed watching you this week with your discussions about fictional Chris Craft and the right stuff. You've had me absolutely cracking up with some of your comments.
I'm in love with fictional Chris Craft. I'm married, but I'm having an extramarital affair with fictitious Chris Craft right now. Sorry, Steve. Steve's like listening to this, probably like, what? No, I have a thing for him. I don't know why. I just want to serve him a Miller Lite while wearing an apron and while he yells at people. I have no idea why.
Yeah. I mean, we'll talk more about the right stuff in a later episode. Yeah. But yeah, he's had some he's had some great scenes. That's for sure. He has had some great scenes.
Yes, he has. He's for me. He's making. I mean, I like the rest of the show. The whole show is excellent. I'm really pleasantly surprised so far by it. If you haven't watched it yet. But I'm really enjoying it, but he's definitely my favorite character right now.
Yeah, me too. Although in this week's episode, I did enjoy what they did with Deke, but we'll talk about that later.
Yes, we'll talk about that later. I agree.
Anyway, let's get on with the show.
One foot between two of my legs. Let's see if that works. That hit me right in the head.
So before we get on to the space station stuff, there's obviously been a couple of pretty big stories this week. So, but, you know, why wouldn't there be? It's another week in spaceflight. On Saturday, the 24th of October, the Saturday just gone, SpaceX successfully launched a Falcon 9 rocket with some more of their Starlink satellites on board. This launch is particularly notable because it was the company's 100th successful launch since their inception in 2002. And while we're talking about SpaceX, there's been some excitement at their Boca Chica launch site in Texas, where the SN8 Starship has been fully erected, ready for testing. If you're not familiar with Starship, then check out the video in our show notes. It's essentially a giant silver bullet of a rocket. Very sci-fi looking, and it's going to potentially redefine spaceflight for the future.
And after another classic NASA move of announcing an announcement, last Thursday, NASA announced we'd have a big announcement on Monday.
It's a lot of announcements.
Yeah, they're a little extra when it comes to announcements.
Aren't they just?
Yes, they are. Which turned out to be water on the moon. Again, this time it is different, though. While we have had many reports of water on the moon in the past, SOFIA, which stands for the Stratospheric Observatory for Infrared Astronomy, which quite incredibly is inside a converted 747 airplane, has found proof of water existing in the sunny parts of the moon, or to be precise, in Clavius, I think that's how it's pronounced, crater, which is one of the largest craters visible from Earth, located in the moon's southern hemisphere. Now, if you've seen 2001: A Space Odyssey, then you should be familiar with it. This is very exciting news because in the past, it was thought that this would only exist in the cold parts of the moon, which are the bits that are in the shadow constantly. But this would suggest that there could be water all over the surface, which would make sustaining life on a lunar base a lot easier.
Yeah, for sure. And while we're talking about discoveries, remember a few weeks back, I think it was episode 3, when we said that there was evidence of life in the clouds of Venus. Well, it appears that after some scrutiny of the data, this may not be the case, and they're looking into it some more. But I loved how this all broke again, because it's a great example of how science works. And I love how the scientific community does this. Someone publishes something and then everyone else tries to prove them wrong. This is an encouraged activity by scientists, and it's essential to ensure that we are continuing to try and improve our knowledge of how things work. But anyway, for now, the idea of life on Venus is back on the drawing board.
And following on from last week's big story, it turns out that OSIRIS-REx took a really big sample from the asteroid Bennu. In fact, it got so much that the lid of the sampling head has jammed open. So they're going to try to attempt to stow the sample earlier than expected. And hopefully we'll still get a big sample back here on Earth in a couple of years when it returns.
And thus concludes our roundup. That's quite a reek.
Yes, it is. There's certainly been a lot going on in the space world.
Yeah, it's almost like every day you and I are having to text each other. Have you seen this? Have you seen this?
Yeah. Yeah, there's always something happening every day, especially with the moon announcement. I was like, what did they find on the moon again? Like,
yeah. I loved I loved how the internet absolutely nearly broke because there was an announcement of an announcement. NASA do that so well, but also it's quite excruciating when they do it.
I think one of our Patreons said something like, oh man, I hope the moon got engaged.
Yeah. I think that was a Mar. Yeah, that was something like that, wasn't it? Yeah. Very amusing.
That was pretty good.
Very amusing. But alas, it was just water. Well, I say just water. It is a big deal, but it's not really new. It's new, but it's not new.
I think it was discovered as far back as the 90s, maybe.
Yeah.
Probably even further back than that. So yeah, who knows? But it's good news. But if you watched For All Mankind,
I was about to say.
Yeah.
I watched a documentary last year, and Molly Cobb discovered discovered water on the moon
at Shackleton.
Yeah,
Shackleton crater. Yeah, so we already know about this during Apollo 15. Yeah. All right.
Another great TV show, Series 2 coming soon. Can't wait. Anyway.
Yes, cannot wait.
Right now the score is man 3, space nothing, but it's a little early in the game.
So we've been talking about this for a few weeks now. This week marks the 20th year of continuous human presence on the International Space Station, which really does blow my mind, because anyone who was born after the 1st November 2000 has had someone living in space above them for the whole of their lives. And that's quite mind-blowing. So a few fun facts about the ISS before we look at the history of space stations. There have been 240 individuals from 19 different countries who have visited the station, which includes 151 Americans and 1 British person.
I'm so sorry.
It's all right. We got one. There have been 231 spacewalks, and one of them was done by our very own Brit. And there are 2 bathrooms, and each astronaut has to work out for 2 hours a day, so they have a gym up there as well. Up to 6 spacecraft can be docked at any one time, and there are 8 miles of electrical cable on board. The current crew arrived last week: Kate Rubins, and 2 guys called Sergey, whose surnames I didn't have time to try and learn this week in terms of how to pronounce. And in fact, I don't even think I'm saying Sergey right. So I apologize to everyone involved because I've just got all three names very wrong.
There's a lot of Sergeys in the Russian space program, so I think most of their cosmonauts are named Sergey for some reason, so I totally understand. I'm just amazed. I remember when the first crew up went up back in the day when I was probably 22. I remember when they went up, and I believe the first crew was Bill Shepard. He was the American, and I believe he was the commander of the first mission. Sergei Krikalev, who I remember because and Sergei Krikalev is a really he's very famous. He's a real famous. I believe now he's in charge of their space program. He's a big deal in Russia. He's called the last Soviet because he was on the space station Mir for I want to say 10 months in 1991 to 2. When he arrived there, he was Soviet. And when he came back, he was Russian.
Of course.
He had a different nationality. I know there was a third person with Expedition 1, and I am very ashamed to say it was a cosmonaut who was probably named Sergei something. So I am very ashamed to say this, and I'm sure I offended somebody. So I apologize. But there is a movie about Expedition 1 and 2, and it's an IMAX movie. And I've seen it in IMAX, and it's really cool. I think I saw it in IMAX 3D. I don't know. I want to say I saw it at Kennedy Space Center. But I have it on DVD, and it's called Space Station. It's really a beautiful film. But I do have to say the ISS looked a lot different back then than it does now. It was not nearly as large. Now it's about the size of a football field. Because if you watch that movie, you're going to say, wow, that doesn't look like the ISS. And it was not completed yet. So... because it's a modular space station, and basically what that means is different parts of it are shipped up individually, and they're just put together.
Yeah.
So
I've just looked up the guy's name. His name was Yuri. So close.
Yuri. Okay,
yeah.
That's a pretty common cosmonaut name.
Yuri Gidzenko. Was the other member, but yeah, I just looked up a photo as well, and it's completely different. It's hard to imagine that that's turned into what we now know as the ISS.
It's not really recognizable as the ISS we know now. So
yeah,
I just don't want people to watch the movie and be like, that's not that is the ISS. It was just a baby.
Yeah,
I can't believe it's been that long. It doesn't seem that long, but I do remember when the first crew went up, and I remember when they started putting the pieces together. I do remember that, and it doesn't seem very long ago, but looking at the pictures of the fashions and my eyebrows back then, it was 20 years ago. So
I found something. I was doing a little bit of research today, and in as you said, it's a modular station, and the Russian stuff was all automated. It would all join and connect in space, and that all the electrics and all that would turn on immediately. It was all connected. Whereas the US side all had to be doing spacewalks, or it had to be connected with EVAs. And that surprised me that there was such a difference in approach to building their own sections, even though it's all become the same house.
I do want to say that despite our political differences, Russia and the United States in space actually get along fairly well. And the Russian crews and the U.S. crews do work together. To me, it's kind of an example of how, diplomacy in space, that kind of interconnectedness of space flight can bring people together, and make people a little closer despite all the crap that's going on down here.
Yeah.
But the Russians and the United States do have kind of, I guess, different approaches to space stations and how they do stuff.
I think you're so right. Mm-hmm. The ISS is perhaps one of the greatest achievements of humankind, simply because of how it's brought everyone together, so many countries together to work on a project. So it's essentially Canada, Japan, Russia, and the United States, and the 11 members of the European Space Agency. So that's what, 15 countries, I think? Yeah,
I think so,
15 countries who have got together and done something for the greater good. And the fact that 18 different countries have had people on board shows this is good. This is about coming together and doing something. And I hope that continues beyond this project. I hope this sets a blueprint. It's a shame that China aren't involved because they're such a big player in space now. I know they've got we'll talk more about them in a bit, I'm sure. But when they put this all together, if they'd managed to get China involved, that would have really put the icing on the cake in terms of using it for diplomacy.
I agree. I wish we could work with China, or we were in the position to work with China right now. And I think it's kind of a shame because I noticed and we talked about it, I think a couple weeks back, the Artemis Accord.
Yeah.
I do think it's kind of a shame because we're not working with Russia on that. So it's kind of, I don't know. I think, like you said, I think the ISS really is a good example of, how I'm getting a little off track here, but there's this book by Frank White called The Overview Effect. It has stories in it from astronauts who have, gone to space and kind of how their perspective of the world and humankind changed from their going to space, and how when you leave the planet and you see on Earth, we look at a map and you see lines, you see cities that are divided, and countries that are divided, and land masses that okay, I can't go to North Korea and South Korea, you can't go into one area, and in space you don't see any of that. There's everything appears borderless, and that book really kind of has that spirit of, okay, spaceflight does have this way of kind of perpetuating this sense of oneness, I guess, with humanity. So
for sure,
and I think the ISS really exemplifies that. So I got a little off tangent there, but I hope it made sense.
No, but it's also important to acknowledge that it's an important part of life on Earth right now, is the fact that we have this thing floating up ahead that is a cooperative endeavor. And I think that should be celebrated, and it's nice when you look up and you see it go past. It's a nice thing, especially when there are people in there, and they're from different nationalities, and it's not just only Americans up there or only Russians up there. It can be all kinds of countries up there, and that's great, and hopefully more people in the future as well. And the plans are to add on more modules to even turn it into almost a space hotel in the future, which we'll see how that goes. But it's a great achievement, and obviously it owes a lot to what came before it, going right back to the first station back in 1971.
Wait, let me try straddling it like this. Wait, we're getting umbilicals and everything else. I'll twist it over. I think this may do it.
So we're going to talk a little bit about space station heritage and the history of space stations. And the first space station was not Skylab, which, when I say that, it surprises some people because they're used to hearing me talk about Skylab all the time. The first space station was actually launched in 1971, and it was launched by the Soviets, and it was Salyut 1. And I really want to say you really have to hand it to the Soviets, because I believe their effort with their space stations, because if you look at their history starting in 1971, they really kept sending up more advanced space stations with the Salyut program, and eventually with Mir, which was more sophisticated, and it was a modular space station. But if you look at the Soviet and the Russian space program, to me, their effort in really establishing space stations and having crews, relieve, a crew come up and a crew come down, that really kind of set a template for like long-term space habitation.
Yeah.
So they really pioneered that, and a lot of people are not going to agree with what I'm about to say. I'm probably going to offend some people, but I really think it's almost analogous with the Apollo program.
Yeah.
Okay, we did send people to the moon, and that was incredible, and nobody's taking credit from that, but the Soviets they really pioneered space stations and how to send up people for longer periods, and to kind of learn a little bit of how to live in space. So I do have to give them a lot of credit. Back to where I started, though, the Soviets did send up the first space station in 1971. Unfortunately, and this is not a happy story here, unfortunately, I forgot how many days the crew were up there for, but they were up there for,
I think it was 21.
I want to say they broke the longevity record. 21. Okay.
I think that's what I read earlier. It's around 20 anyway.
At the time, that was the record for, longest time spent in space, because Apollo hadn't spent that much time in space. So that was a pretty big deal at the time. But unfortunately, when the crew came back, I believe there was an issue with a valve in their Soyuz, and the capsule depressurized and the crew expired. So, which is really tragic. It's not a happy ending. So basically what happened to Salyut 1 is it came back down. It deorbited and it was not used again after that. I believe Salyut 2 was launched. I forgot. I think it was launched in maybe 73. That one didn't quite make it to space. I want to say it broke apart or something like that. Something weird happened with it. I believe Salyut 3 went up shortly after, and some of the space stations were also called the Almaz, and that's really a story unto itself, but basically they were spying. They were doing the MOLE program, the Manned Orbiting Laboratory program, kind of their style. They were spying on us and stuff. Yeah, and that really was not talked about in the West until more recently. It was not talked about like publicly. Like it was something that was like, yeah, they were spying. We didn't know about it.
Yeah.
So the Soviets had, I want to say, 7 of these Salyut space stations. They weren't very big. If you look at pictures of them, they're not very large. There's also a really neat story. If you have time and you want to read more about it, the Salyut 7 basically died in space. I want to say this happened around like 1985. And basically it just, ground controllers could not do anything with it. It was unresponsive. And a crew, and I believe the commander of the crew was Vladimir Zhenebekov. I think I said his name right. Yeah.
I'm not going to correct you.
There was a crew sent up. It was 2 men, and they went inside and they resuscitated the space station. However, it was frozen inside, and they had to wear like winter clothes. I mean, it was nuts. If you look at the pictures from this, it's insane. But they resuscitated the space station, and I want to say a few more crews went up there. So, yeah, it's a wild story. If you have time, if you want to read about it, just type in Salyut 7 rescue or something like that, and you should be able to find the story. But it is insane. They actually went up there and, yeah, totally, revived this frozen, dead space station. It's nuts.
Wow, I hadn't actually heard about that. I will go and look that up, and if I find an article about it, I'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah.
Before you move on, it was 23 days, not 21. I just checked.
Okay.
Yeah. Just before someone corrects me.
Yeah, no, that's okay. But back to Russian and Soviet space station.
Yeah.
Space station's immediate predecessor to the ISS was Mir.
Mm-hmm.
It was, I want to say the base block was launched in February 1986. The reason why I remember this was because it happened around my birthday that year. And I was real little, but I remember this because in the West, we didn't know much about what they were doing at the time because there was this was during the Cold War. So we didn't really know much. So I think I read in the paper, because I was precocious, I was reading the newspaper. I think I read in the paper around that time, the Soviet TASS says the Soviet Unions have launched a space station. That was it.
Nice.
That was all we got. So now I'm going to backtrack again because this is kind of, Mir is where the American and the Russian space programs start to intersect. So I'm going to backtrack a little bit and go back to the start of America's space station endeavor, which was Skylab.
Never heard of it. No, I've not heard of that once. You should talk about it, perhaps.
Oh, God. I'm kind of afraid to talk about it because I'm like, we're going to be here for 8 hours. You're going to be hearing stuff about it that nobody cares about. But I'll just try to summarize Skylab up real quick. In the 60s, George Mueller sketched the idea for Skylab down on, I want to say, a napkin or something. There is a picture of his sketch on the internet. It's kind of neat to see. But in the late 60s, there were kind of some different concepts for what would become Skylab kind of bandied about. One of them was called a wet workshop. Basically, we would launch like an S4B type space station, and crews would go up, in like a Saturn 1B, a smaller rocket, and they would drain the fuel out of the larger section and live in that section.
Wow.
Which is completely nuts. And I think Werner von Braun himself tried to test this concept. I want to say he got in an EVA suit and he got in the tank in Huntsville. It was not in JSC like it is now.
Yeah.
So he went and tried to test this concept himself, and he was like, "This just doesn't work. It's too bulky. It's really too much of a pain." So they went to the dry workshop concept, which basically is what Skylab ended up being. It was basically the upper stage of a Saturn V or S4B. Yeah, and it was dry, which meant there was no propellant or anything in it. So fast forward, we're going to skip a lot of time. We're going to May 14th, 1973, and it launches from Kennedy Space Center and immediately runs into a bunch of problems during the launch. And I'm going to summarize this real quickly because this is a whole podcast in itself. So basically during launch, a bunch of bad stuff happens. In about 60 seconds, the ground controller's like, "That's weird. Why is SAS2 solar panel drawing current?" Well, turns out what was happening was the micrometeoroid shield was about to come off. And so it came off. And what it did was when that happened, it dislodged the solar panels. And at about 10 minutes into the launch, when the S2 stage basically left the space station, when that popped off at staging, the force of that basically caused the SAS2 solar panel to rip right off. And the other one was jammed. So immediately it ran into problems. So we're going to fast forward through this. 10 days later, Skylab 2 launches, and they go up, and they actually managed to save the space station. They had a replacement sun shield, which was deployed through one of the scientific airlocks, and they also had they also were able to do a spacewalk, which is, if you want to read about that in itself, it's nuts that they did this. But Conrad and Kerwin, Pete Conrad and Joe Kerwin, 2 of the crew members, did a spacewalk, and they actually dislodged the solar panel. So they basically saved the space station, which was incredible in itself, because really, if you read more into all the launch anomalies, it almost didn't make it. But that's, like I said, that's really a whole story separately.
Yeah.
Skylab was so successful, it had 3 crews. The first Skylab 2 was up 28 days, which broke the endurance record that Salyut 1 had set. The second crew was up, who were Alan Bean, Jack Lausma, and Owen Garriott, were up for, I think 59 days. And the third crew, which was the best crew, I'm a little biased because they're really nice guys, was Jerry Carr, William Pogue, and Ed Gibson, and they were up for 84 days, which that record was not broken until, 1995, for a space station increment. So,
right.
Yeah, they set a lot of records, and Skylab did a ton of space science, and the data is really still being gone through today because it was the direct predecessor to the ISS in terms of, okay, how do human bodies react in space? What kind of things can we learn about, bone mass and blood and muscle mass in space? It was really the direct precursor to that program in terms of things like that. So it did a ton of science experiments. I think there were 80 experiments on board, but they did over, 300 investigations on there. So they accomplished an awful lot in a very short period of time. I want to say the vehicle was only crewed for 8 months.
Yeah.
So I'm going to end it at that, because if I get into the whole Skylab story, we're going to be here for a few years. So
yeah. I did watch Searching for Skylab recently after our discussion on documentaries. I managed to get hold of that, and it's wonderful. So everyone should, if you can get hold of that, be sure to check it out. Emily put me onto that one, and it's really good. You'll learn a lot about that program. But I will use some of the audio from Pete and Joe's spacewalk.
Yes,
throughout this podcast. So if you've heard anything from, it's probably from that. But yeah, if Pete Conrad was alive for the .com boom, I think he would have set up a website called wefixanything.com.
Yes, he would.
I'm pretty sure that's what he would have done.
Yeah, they really saved the day.
It's incredible what they did.
It's an incredible story. It really is. And I think it's a story that's really underrated because a lot of people just don't remember that. I mean, that Skylab was really crippled when it came up. What they really did, in turning it around and making that experience positive, really was amazing, and I really feel like it doesn't get enough credit in human spaceflight and spaceflight in general.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. More I've looked into that, that's definitely true, and especially the turnaround from the point of launch to them going up and not knowing what they were going to be greeted with. It's not like today where you have, you can send something up and get a good look at it, or there'll be something up there which will be able to get a good look at it, or something.
Well,
they didn't have that then. They had a bit of telemetry, they had a bit of data on the ground.
I don't want to burst your bubble. They did have an intelligence satellite take some pictures.
I take it all back. I don't know anything.
There were some intelligence satellites that took some pictures, from what I understand, and I didn't hear this. None of y'all heard this. You're all deaf right now, but I've been told they were pretty good photos.
Let me retract my whole thing. When they got there, they didn't know what mess it was going to be inside.
Yeah, they didn't know if something had, it was hot in there. It was like 120 plus degrees. They didn't know if stuff had blown up in there. They just didn't. Yeah, they were facing a lot of unknowns, and I think that's very underrated in space history.
Yeah,
it really is.
So the Salyut and Skylab were both the kind of space station that went up on top of a rocket, and then astronauts went up on a different ship to dock with it.
Yes,
and Mir was the first modular space station like we now have the ISS.
And there's a great website by Anatoly Zak called RussianSpaceweb.com, which I believe it should still have this. I believe it has a diagram of a really good graphic of Mir and all of the modules, and basically in the order in which they were attached. So if you really want to look into that, that's the best place, I think, to go look at it. Mir went up in 1986, and over years they added a bunch of stuff and a bunch of modules to it. And in the early 90s, NASA, and I don't think it was called Roscosmos back then, but the Russian space program, they started talking about flying together, and it was basically phase one of the ISS program.
Yeah,
it was kind of the lead up to what would become the ISS. So in 1994, the first step was taken, and Sergei Krikalev, remember him? He flew on Discovery. And shortly after that, I want to say starting in 1995, we started flying astronauts to Mir. And this was basically preparation. I mean, they were real missions, obviously, but it was kind of preparation to see, okay, what will an ISS situation be like? Will it be like living with a Russian crew?
Yeah. How do we manage that from the ground, having different space programs involved and learning those skills?
Exactly. Learning Russian.
Exactly. So my fun fact about Mir is the cosmonaut Valery Polyakov.
It's okay.
So bad with names.
I think you got it right.
He spent 438 consecutive days aboard Mir. From January 94 to March 95, and that is still to this day the longest single human space flight.
The Russians really, you got to hand it to them. They really have pioneered, going up in space for ages and coming back down. And there's also a great movie,
Armageddon.
Not Armageddon. Although I wish that would kind of happen this week before election week. No, I'm just kidding. There is a great movie. I don't know how available it is now. I saw it years ago. It's called Out of the Present, and it's about Sergei Krikalev on Mir as the Soviet Union fell. And it shows him when he comes back, because he was in space for about 10 months because several reasons. I want to say they had some crew swaps or something like that. So he was basically in space a little longer than expected. But when they pull him out of the capsule, when he comes back, he is like a wet noodle. I mean, he looks, seriously, it reminded me of like a newborn baby or something, like, because they don't have, a lot of muscle tone, and they just flop around, and stuff like that. It really reminded me of that. It was like, wow, like, I'm sure it puts your body through a heck of a lot. I've been told there's long duration missions are the equivalent of being in bed for like that length of a time.
I do also love the photographs of the space shuttle docked with Mir, and it's when you see that, and when you then see the photos of the space station docked with the ISS, you realize how much bigger the ISS is than Mir was. Because the space station, the space shuttle, too many double S's. The space shuttle almost dwarfed Mir a little bit. It looked so big up against Mir, but against the space station, ISS, it looked quite small. But that was such an important thing that happened there in terms of where we are now. The fact that NASA and the Russians managed to get together to make sure that the shuttle did connect with Mir, and they were working together. So the ISS was started building in 98 after that.
Yes.
So Mir came down
in 2000.
Yeah,
I think 2000 or 2001.
Obviously, all of the space stations have come down eventually. I was thinking about this earlier. When the ISS eventually comes down, that's going to be crazy because it's huge. What will they just take some of the modules off and pull it down one bit at a time? I'm not sure.
That's a good question.
I'm not sure how they've even thought about how they're going to do that yet. But at some point, they're going to want to deal with it. It's going to become obsolete in many ways.
I don't know. I haven't. That's a really good question. And if anybody out there has any insight into that, please let us know. But my guess, I mean, I'm guessing this completely, is that they'll have to just take it down piece by piece, because I don't have any idea how they would put something that large down just
safely
in the ocean, because what if it does a Skylab and comes down over Australia? Like, no. And Skylab was small.
Yeah, it could take out a serious chunk of a city, couldn't it, and cause some serious damage. But while the ISS has been up, the Chinese have been having their own go at this. They've sent two smallish space stations up, Tiangong 1 and Tiangong 2, and they've both done reasonable amount of time. Well, they had various success with that, but I don't know too much about it. I just know that they've both been up there. And that's happened. Well, I'm so out of the loop with Chinese stuff.
Yeah, I hate to admit this. I don't know much about the Chinese space program. I believe there are a few space historians who discuss the Chinese space program almost exclusively. Like, that's kind of their field of study.
Yeah.
I believe Philip Clark is one of them, and I'm sure he's published some papers in the British Interplanetary Society magazine and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But he's probably the expert in that. I really don't know much about what they do. All I know is that their space stations kind of look like Salyut.
Yeah,
they're small.
Do. Yeah.
I believe they have an idea for like a modular one in the works, but I don't believe they put it up yet.
Maybe things to come there. But it's, as I said, it's a shame they're not involved. And also in the future, we're going to have, maybe in a few years, another space station up there, but a lunar space station with Gateway being proposed to orbit the moon, which is the next step, I guess, isn't it? I suppose it's the natural next step. Although there's question marks about that particular part of the Artemis program. It's exciting. It's even being discussed, in my opinion. Yeah,
and of course we could get into, I won't get too into this, but as far as space habitation in the future, there's a lot of books about that, about people who are interested in like long-term space settlement. Probably the best place to start with that is The High Frontier by Gerard K. O'Neill, it was published a long time ago. It was published in 1976, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're into that kind of stuff, that's the place to start.
Yeah.
So.
And the moon announcement certainly does open up a lot of things in terms of that field of study.
Yes.
Which is exciting. But I imagine for you, Emily, I know you'd probably love to go to the ISS, but I reckon that the ultimate for you would be if they put a replica of Skylab up there and said, Emily, you can go and have a week up there. Go and do 28 days.
I would do it. Yeah, in a heartbeat. I feel like Skylab was it's too underrated. It had so much. It really taught us everything. I mean, on the United States side that we know about space flight, long-term space flight, because we kept all the data from that.
Yeah.
A lot of the data from Skylab is still at JSC to this day. I think they kept all their samples, like
everything. They kept everything. Everything that came out of them was kept and studied.
Yes, they kept their stuff.
that's the detail that they went to, which is quite incredible in order to learn the stuff that we can now use and put into practice now, which is important. But I think, although you say that Skylab is underrated, I think we kind of talked about this. The ISS is underrated. All these the Russian space stations are underrated. And you started with it by saying that what the Russians were doing is up there with the Apollo program, but it's just not discussed about in the same terms. The fact that these have been going on and they've had long duration missions within them, it's now make it look easy when actually it's not easy. Spaceflight isn't easy, and the fact that especially the ISS, the longevity of the ISS is a phenomenal achievement. With all the dangers and with all the things that could go wrong up there, the fact that we've had 20 years, I mean, that's just crazy. I mean, it blows my mind, as I said, that people, anyone born since 1st of November 2000 has always known someone in space. When my parents were born, no one had ever been in space, and now we're at the point where people are always in space, and that's on the shoulders, not necessarily of the Apollo program. It's on the shoulders of those previous space station missions. And that's the truth and often unspoken truth about those missions. And they're important, and they shouldn't be forgotten.
Absolutely.
And they should be given a bit more credit.
I agree totally. Yeah, I think starting with Salyut 1. I mean, going that far back in 1971, there's a lot of heritage that I think people don't think about when they look at the ISS.
And the fact that Soyuz 11 mission was ultimately a failure as well, and a loss of life, of the 3 lives, should mean we talk about it more. We talk about the Apollo 1 fire and how tragic that was, rightfully so. But the loss of those 3 Russians trying to do something that no one had done before, of living on a space station, is equally as tragic. Obviously, they're the only 3 people that have ever died above the Kerwin line.
The Karman line.
The Karman line.
The Kerwin line. That
I
Joe
Joe Kerwin on the brain
there.
No, sorry.
It's okay. Yeah.
I blame you. But that we should know their names. I don't know their names, but I know Grissom, White, and Chaffee.
I remember reading a little bit about when Soyuz 11 came back, and when our side found out what had happened, there was a lot of fear in the U.S. space program that, oh my God, did something, because we were developing Skylab at that time. I mean, there were astronauts training for it at that time, and there was a lot of fear and trepidation that, were they not able to tolerate, space flight for that long? Was that why they died?
Mm-hmm.
And eventually we did discover it had nothing to do with their increment in space, but I agree with you completely. I think, we really owe these guys a huge debt, and I don't think we discuss a lot of these early sacrifices as much as we should, especially in the context of where we're at now,
Exactly. Anyway, I've learned a lot in that, and there's a lot I need to digest and go away and look up, and I hope anyone listening is also feeling the same. Because it's all good stuff, and congratulations to everyone involved in the ISS.
Yes, we appreciate it, and we love seeing it fly by in the night sky.
Long may it continue.
You got a hold of my legs, Joe? Yeah, one of them, good.
And that's all we have time for this week. As we said at the top, please do get in touch if you want to comment on anything we've discussed.
Which does remind me that Rick still got in contact. He commented on one of our posts saying that my comment last week about someone speeding up communication link did make him giggle. In fact, he said that Mr. Einstein says, no, it is what it is. So, our idea that wondering whether there was a way of speeding up the comms from Earth to Mars, apparently not. So that clears that up. And but thank you for all the other comments too, and the memes. There was a great meme this week. We love Baby Yoda memes, that's for sure. That was wonderful. Thanks, Todd, for that. And it's really great to hear from you. So please do give us a flavour and get in contact. And maybe give us a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever there is an option to.
And thanks again to our Patreons who continue to support the show monthly. If you're interested, you can join in over on patreon.com/spaceandthings. And don't forget that you can get one of our first t-shirts or make a donation over on our website, which is spaceandthingspodcast.com.
Yep, it's all very much appreciated. Please do have a look at that anyway. But for now, remember, In space, no one can hear you stream.
Space and Things has been brought to you by And Things Productions.